Welcome to today's deep dive. We've got a massive, completely fascinating stack of sources to go through today. I mean, we are looking at ancient original texts, linguistic analyses, and some heavy theological hitters like Augustine and John Calvin.
Yeah, it's a really deep well to draw from.
Right. And our mission today is to answer a question submitted by one of you listening right now. It is a question that completely shatters how we typically view spiritual warfare. Like, what if everything you knew about the adversary's role in your spiritual life was wrong?
Which is, a pretty jarring thought.
Exactly, because we are constantly taught that the devil is purely an agent of destruction, like the ultimate enemy. But what if we're missing a terrifyingly beautiful paradox? What if the adversary is actually and involuntarily an instrument of divine sanctification?
That is a dangerous, almost heretical sounding question at first glance, but it's an absolutely essential one to ask.
Right, because if you are someone who takes their faith seriously, you usually spend your time praying against these forces. But today, we're exploring a cosmic framework where the enemy's malice is literally hijacked by God to forge your ultimate divine sanctification.
The implications of that are just staggering.
Yeah, if you've ever felt like you're under relentless spiritual attack, understanding this mechanism changes the entire landscape of your spiritual life. I mean, it completely changes how you view your divine sanctification. Let's investigate the biblical evidence.
Gladly, because we are going to strip away centuries of, superficial Sunday school theology to look at the stark original phrasing of the ancient texts.
I love that.
Yeah, by examining the historical and linguistic context of figures like Job in the Old Testament and Paul and Peter in the New Testament, we are going to build a completely different paradigm.
Okay, so we'll uncover 5 shocking truths about how the enemy's attacks are subverted for your spiritual growth. If you want biblical mysteries revealed, you're in the right place.
Because here's what most people don't know. Spiritual warfare isn't just a defensive battle where you simply try to survive until you get to heaven. The biblical evidence points to something much more aggressive on God's part.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're talking about a process that actively weaponizes the devil's attacks against the devil himself. And to see how this works, we really have to start with the oldest book in the Bible.
Right, the book of Job. It is the absolute archetype of extreme, unjust suffering.
But here's where it gets strange. Something doesn't quite add up in the traditional reading of the story.
How do you mean?
Well, normally we're taught that Job is just a great guy. The devil ruins his life, Job stays faithful, and then God gives him double. Like, what are we missing there?
We are missing the actual accusation. The shocking fact is that Satan's challenge to God in the opening chapters wasn't just about destroying Job physically or financially.
Correct.
It was a direct, calculated accusation that Job's righteousness was purely transactional. I mean, in Job chapter 1, verse 9, the adversary explicitly asks God, does Job fear God for nothing?
Wait, really?
Yeah.
Yes. He's accusing Job of being, like, basically a spiritual mercenary.
Yeah.
Like, he only loves you because you pay him.
Exactly. And the biblical evidence completely backs up why the adversary thought he had a solid case here.
Wait, really? He had a case?
Well, look at Job 1.1 and then jump to 1.5. Job was wealthy. He was considered morally upright, sure, but his knowledge of God was almost entirely theoretical. And psychologically, it was deeply fear-based.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Job 1.5 tells us he would constantly offer these preventative sacrifices for his children, thinking, perhaps my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts.
Wow.
He was so terrified of losing his divine protection and his social standing that he essentially created a religion of anxiety management.
Hold on, let me get this straight. Satan wasn't just randomly attacking a good man.
No.
But wait, this means he was actually exposing a faith that was conditionally tied to prosperity and reputation. Like he was pointing out a fundamental flaw in Job's spiritual foundation.
Precisely. The enemy thought he was proving Job was a fraud. He believed that if you take away the hedge of protection, the faith completely collapses.
And that leads us to the actual fallout of that cosmic wager.
Yeah.
So the adversary is given permission to destroy everything. But the expected outcome doesn't happen.
No, it doesn't.
But here's where it gets strange. The devil successfully stripped away every single ounce of Job's self-sufficiency.
Right. His wealth, his family, his health, all gone in a matter of days.
He's literally sitting in ashes, scraping his sores.
Yeah, it's brutal. But instead of cursing God and dying like the enemy predicted, Job undergoes a profound, glorious process of refinement.
The psychological devastation must have been just profound. I mean, he wrestles with God. He demands answers.
It breaks, yeah. But he doesn't walk away. And in Job 42.5, after God finally answers him out of the whirlwind, we get the absolute pinnacle of this revelation.
Which is what?
Job says to God, my ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you.
Oh, man. Let's flip this completely. But wait, this means the devil, acting out of pure, unadulterated malice, was the involuntary catalyst that pushed Job out of a theoretical second-hand religion directly into a transformational personal encounter with the Creator.
Exactly. The enemy literally refined the very faith he set out to destroy.
That is wild.
He burned away the transactional religion and the exhausting anxiety management, leaving only pure, tested trust.
The mechanism of extreme loss removed Job's illusion of control.
Yes. So the devil was essentially doing God's heavy lifting without even realizing it. He was the fire that purified the gold. He stripped away the gift so Job could finally see the giver.
And that leads us to the New Testament, right?
Yeah.
Because if you think that Job's story is profound, the New Testament takes this exact mechanism to an even more extreme level.
It absolutely does.
Prepare yourself, because we are about to look at one of the most misunderstood passages in the New Testament. And honestly, this is where things get really uncomfortable. We're talking about the Apostle Paul.
Yes, specifically in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 7 through 10.
But here's where it gets strange.
Right.
The shocking fact here is that Paul's famous thorn in the flesh wasn't just a random physical illness like, bad eyesight or a chronic disease, which is what I was always taught in Sunday school.
A lot of people are taught that.
But it was explicitly, in his own words, a messenger of Satan.
We have to look at the original Greek context here. Paul was experiencing things no human being should be able to handle. I mean, he describes being taken up to the third heaven.
The third heaven.
Yeah, in ancient Jewish cosmology, the first heaven is the sky, the second is the stars, and the third is the direct, unmediated dwelling place of God himself.
Okay, wow.
So Paul was receiving extraordinary mind-bending revelations. But human psychology cannot handle that level of divine exposure without becoming dangerously arrogant.
Right, the ego would just inflate massively.
Exactly. So, to prevent spiritual pride, God permitted a demonic entity, an angelos satana in the Greek, to actively torment him.
Wait, time out. I have to push back on this for a second.
Yeah.
You're telling me a loving God permitted a literal demon to torture his most important apostle?
Mm-hmm.
How does that not cross the line into, divine abuse? That sounds incredibly contradictory. God is using a demon.
It is a staggering tension to hold. It really is. But look at Paul's exact phrasing. He says, "To keep me from becoming conceited because of these surpassingly great revelations, there was given me a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me."
Wow.
God didn't author the evil, but he allowed the enemy's messenger to strike Paul, specifically to protect Paul's most essential virtue, which was his humility.
But wait, this means without that humility, Paul's entire ministry, his entire spiritual journey, would have been destroyed by his own spiritual pride.
He would have been useless to the kingdom.
A proud Paul would have built a monument to himself instead of building the early church.
Exactly.
That is incredible. God used a literal agent of the devil as a spiritual bodyguard to keep Paul's ego in check.
Yeah.
The devil fortified what he meant to destroy.
It is the ultimate paradox of divine sovereignty.
And that leads us to the why behind all this. Because we have to look at how Jesus actually responds to Paul's torment.
Right, because Paul didn't just take this lying down, he fought back.
Fervently.
Oh yeah, 3 separate times he begged the Lord to remove this demonic messenger. He wanted it gone.
But here's where it gets strange.
Yeah.
Jesus basically says no. Which brings us to the mechanism of how this actually works.
The original text reveals something shocking in Jesus' direct response in 2 Corinthians 12.9.
What does he say?
Jesus tells Paul, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness."
Made perfect.
Let's look at the Greek word for made perfect. It is teleomai. It doesn't mean to just improve slightly or get a little better. It means to be brought to absolute completion, to reach its ultimate intended fulfillment.
But wait, this means, I love this, because it works exactly like a vaccine.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Think about it. You take a small, deactivated dose of a virus, something meant to make you sick, and you inject it into your system. Your body fights it, and in the process, it builds an unbreakable immunity. The virus is subverted to make you stronger. True spiritual growth isn't about the removal of hardship. It's not about living a pain-free, perfectly insulated life.
That's a brilliant analogy. The weakness caused by the enemy's attack was the exact condition required for God's power to operate at maximum capacity teleomai in Paul's life.
It forced a complete surrender to divine dependence.
The devil thought he was crippling an apostle. God knew he was creating an unstoppable vessel for the gospel.
And that leads us to our final and perhaps most dramatic personal intervention. This involves one of Jesus's absolute closest friends.
Peter, the fisherman who thought he was completely invincible.
Right, the guy who was basically walking around acting like he was the spiritual Terminator. The buildup to his biggest failure is just chilling.
In Luke chapter 22, verses 31 and 32, we see a conversation that should make every single one of us tremble.
Yeah.
Jesus turns to Peter and says, "Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift all of you as wheat."
But here's where it gets strange. The devil had to ask permission.
Yes.
Like he couldn't just attack him.
No, he had to ask. And we need to look at the stark original imagery of the text here. Satan wanted to sift you as wheat. The Greek word is syniazo.
Syniazo. Okay.
This isn't a gentle sorting. In ancient agrarian societies, sifting meant violently crushing the harvested stalks, throwing them into the air, and aggressively shaking the sieve so the wind could separate the worthless chaff from the valuable grain.
That sounds brutal.
It is a violent, destructive agitation. Satan wanted to completely shatter Peter's faith.
But wait, Jesus is right there. He's the Son of God. He could just say no.
He could have.
But he didn't stop it. He just stepped back and let the devil put Peter in a spiritual blender.
He permitted the sifting. But look at what Jesus does as our ultimate high priest, a role detailed later in Hebrews 7.25.
Okay.
He doesn't stop the trial. He intercedes within it. Jesus says, "I have prayed for you, Simon, that your faith may not fail." He prayed that the core of Peter's faith wouldn't be completely annihilated. And then Jesus adds this incredible prophecy. He says, "And when you have turned back, strengthen your brothers."
But to understand this, go back to Peter's earlier arrogance right before this moment.
Oh, yeah.
Peter was wildly overconfident. He was telling Jesus, "Lord, I am ready to go with you to prison and to death."
He really believed it, too.
He was operating entirely on his own dangerous self-reliance. And human strength just shatters under real spiritual pressure.
Exactly. Peter thought he was solid grain. He didn't realize how much chaff was still inside him.
But wait, this means Peter's massive, humiliating failure, like literally denying Jesus 3 times, making eye contact with him right as the rooster crowed, that was the exact thing that cured him of his ego.
Yes.
The devil's violent sifting was the mechanism that broke Peter's pride.
You've got it. The enemy wanted to destroy the grain. God used the violent shaking to remove the chaff. It was an agonizing, devastating failure, but it was the exact crucible required to forge Peter into the compassionate, grace-filled leader of the early church.
Because he finally understood his own weakness.
He could finally lead with grace because he had profoundly experienced his own desperate need for it. That is the genius of God's sovereign process.
And that leads us to the bigger picture here. Okay, let's map this out because this is a lot of heavy theology to take in at once.
It is a lot, yeah.
We've looked at 3 monumental cases of divine sanctification. Job was refined in the fire of absolute loss, which cured his anxiety-based religion.
Right.
Paul was anchored and kept humble by a demonic thorn. And Peter was violently sifted to remove the toxic chaff of his own pride.
And from these cases, 3 core discoveries really emerge. First, the devil is not an autonomous rival God. He is, as Martin Luther vividly put it, God's devil.
God's devil.
Yeah, he is like a dog on a leash, operating strictly under absolute divine control. Second, God consistently and brilliantly transforms the enemy's poison into our spiritual medicine.
He subverts the attack entirely.
Yes. And third, divine sanctification is a continuous, often painful journey. It shows us that our profound weaknesses and our breaking points actually become the main stage for God's strength to be displayed.
This changes everything. It completely rewrites how we view our darkest moments. By the way, if you are having your mind blown right now and you're listening to this deep dive, subscribe for more biblical mysteries. We are just scratching the surface here.
Oh, absolutely. The layers of truth in these ancient texts are infinite.
So we have to bring this down to earth. What does this mean for us today?
Practically speaking.
Right. If you're listening to this right now, maybe you're driving to work or sitting in your living room dealing with a nightmare scenario in your family or your health. How does this theology actually apply to your daily life?
Well, we can look to historical theology for guidance here. Think about Augustine in his Enchiridion, specifically chapter 11, or John Calvin in his Institutes, book 1, chapter 17.
Okay, what do they say?
They grappled deeply with this exact tension. Their conclusion, based on this biblical evidence, is that God is so entirely good and so absolutely sovereign that he would never, ever allow evil to exist unless he was powerful enough to draw a greater, eternal good out of it.
Wow.
Calvin emphasized that God's providence means nothing is random, not even the devil's actions.
So the suffering isn't random. It isn't a sign that God abandoned you or that you just, didn't pray hard enough.
Far from it. Now, we must balance the truth here. This does not mean we just roll over and surrender to the enemy.
Right.
James 4.7 commands us to resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Matthew 26.41 tells us to watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation.
So we are commanded to actively fight.
We are.
We don't invite the attack, we don't celebrate the thorn, or go looking for a sifting.
No, absolutely not. But when the attack inevitably comes, and when the night is incredibly dark, we do not need to despair. We don't need to panic like God somehow lost control of the steering wheel.
Because the next time you face a relentless spiritual attack, or a glaring, humiliating personal weakness that you just can't seem to shake,
Yeah.
you have to realize that God might be using the enemy's pure malice as a chisel to sculpt you into the image of Christ.
Beautifully said.
The very thing trying to destroy you is the instrument forging you.
He is the master of the orchestra, and he will use every instrument, even the discordant ones, to play a symphony of redemption.
Wow. Are we fighting the instrument instead of surrendering to the master orchestrating the symphony? That's heavy.
It asks a lot of us, psychologically and spiritually.
But wait, it gets more interesting.
Oh.
If God can use the greatest enemy of the universe as an unwilling tool for our ultimate good, what does that say about the minor irritations, the deep betrayals, and the daily frustrations we face?
That's the real challenge, isn't it?
Exactly. If uncovering the truth about divine sanctification resonated with you, subscribe and hit the bell. Drop a comment with your biggest takeaway about divine sanctification. Next video. The Nephilim Origins. Your engagement spreads these truths.